Ethan Carter lived on a small farm at the edge of town. It was not much, but it was home. His family worked hard every single day to keep the farm running. They grew corn, wheat, and a few vegetables that they sold at the local market. Life was simple, but it was also tough. Money was always tight, and there were days when Ethan's mother would sit at the kitchen table staring at bills she didn't know how to pay. Still, Ethan loved his family more than anything. He helped out however he could, whether it was feeding the chickens, fixing fences, or working in the fields under the hot sun. Even though Ethan was only 15 years old, he already had calloused hands from all the physical labor. His jeans were patched up in several places, and his sneakers had holes near the toes. None of this bothered him too much because he knew his family couldn't afford new things very often. What did bother him, though, was school. School was where life felt hardest for Ethan. Every morning, Ethan walked 2 miles to get to class. The walk itself wasn't so bad. It gave him time to think and enjoy the quiet countryside. But once he stepped through the doors of the high school, everything changed. The other students noticed him right away. Some kids whispered behind their hands when they saw him. Others pointed and laughed openly. Ethan tried to ignore them most of the time, but it wasn't easy. Chad Miller was one of the worst offenders. Chad was tall and athletic with short, blonde hair and a confident swagger. He played football and was popular among his classmates. Unfortunately, Chad also enjoyed making fun of people who weren't like him. And Ethan, with his dirty fingernails and faded shirts, was an easy target. Chad rarely missed an opportunity to tease Ethan, especially in front of others. "Hey, Farmer Fred," Chad called out one morning as Ethan entered the classroom. "Did you roll around in the mud before coming to school today?" The other students giggled nervously. Ethan didn't respond. He just kept walking to his seat near the back of the room. He hated being called names, but he knew better than to argue with Chad. Arguing only made things worse. Megan Hayes, another student in the ER class, joined in the teasing. She was pretty with long brown hair and a sharp tongue. "Seriously, Ethan," she said, smirking. "Don't you own a comb, or maybe some soap?" Her voice dripped with sarcasm, and her friends burst into laughter. Ethan clenched his jaw, but said nothing. He slid into his chair and pulled out his notebook. Writing helped him focus. When he wrote, he could forget about the whispers and snickers around him. Sometimes he imagined himself somewhere else, somewhere far away from this classroom, far away from Chad and Megan and all the others who thought they were better than him. At lunchtime, Ethan usually ate alone. He sat outside on a bench near the basketball court, eating the sandwich his mom had packed for him. Other kids stayed clear of him, either because they didn't want to be associated with someone like Ethan, or because they were afraid of what Chad might say if they did. Either way, Ethan preferred it this way. Being alone was better than being mocked. One day, while sitting on the bench, Ethan overheard a group of boys talking nearby. They were discussing a science fair that the school was hosting later in the year. Apparently, the winner would receive a big cash prize along with recognition from teachers and peers. Ethan listened carefully, his interest piqued. A science fair sounded interesting. Maybe it was something he could do. That evening, after finishing his chores on the farm, Ethan went up to his attic bedroom. It wasn't much, a narrow space, filled with old furniture and boxes, but it was his private sanctuary. In one corner stood an old laptop that his dad had found at a garage sale. Ethan used it whenever he had free time, teaching himself about computers and technology. He loved learning, even if no one else seemed to care. As he sat down at the desk, Ethan began searching online for information about science fairs. He read about projects that past winners had created, robots, solar-powered gadgets, and even apps designed to solve real-world problems. Each idea sparked something inside him. Maybe he could build something amazing too. Something that would show everyone he wasn't just some poor farm boy, but building a project required materials, tools, and knowledge, all of which Ethan lacked. He didn't let that discourage him, though. Instead, he started thinking creatively. Over the next few weeks, he visited junkyards and recycling centers, collecting scraps of metal, wires, and broken electronics. At night, he studied tutorials on coding and robotics, determined to teach himself whatever he needed to know. Meanwhile, life at school continued as usual. Chad and his friends never missed a chance to make fun of Ethan. One afternoon during gym class, Chad grabbed Ethan's backpack and dumped its contents onto the floor. Old notebooks, pens, and a half-eaten apple spilled out. The other students laughed as Ethan bent down to pick everything up. "What's this?" Chad asked, holding up a crumpled piece of paper he'd found tucked inside one of the notebooks. It was a rough sketch of what looked like a robot. "Are you trying to build a machine, Farmer Fred? Planning to replace yourself with a tractor?" The comment earned another round of laughter from the crowd. Ethan felt his face grow hot with embarrassment, but he refused to give Chad the satisfaction of seeing him upset. "It's none of your business," he muttered, snatching the paper back. Chad raised an eyebrow. "Oh, come on, don't be shy. Let us see what you're working on." "I'm not showing you anything," Ethan replied firmly. Then, without waiting for a response, he turned and walked away, clutching the sketch tightly in his hand. Back at home, Ethan climbed up to his attic room and stared at the drawing. It was true. He didn't have much to show yet. But deep down, he believed in himself. He believed that if he worked hard enough, he could create something incredible, something that would silence the bullies once and for all. And so, Ethan made a decision. No matter how difficult things got, he wouldn't give up. He would prove to everyone, including himself, that he was capable of greatness. Ethan knew that creating something truly remarkable would take more than just hard work. It would require patience, creativity, and a lot of trial and error. Every evening after finishing his chores on the farm, he retreated to his attic room to focus on his dream. His tiny workspace was filled with scraps of metal, spare wires, and half-finished gadgets. An old lamp flickered above his desk, casting shadows across the room, but Ethan didn't mind. He was too busy thinking about how to bring his invention to life. The idea came to him one night while he was lying in bed staring at the ceiling. What if he could build a machine that helped farmers like his family? Something that could plant seeds, water crops, and monitor soil conditions, all on its own. It sounded impossible at first, but the more Ethan thought about it, the more excited he became. If he could create such a machine, it might not only help his family's struggling farm, but also make farming easier for others. The next morning, Ethan sketched out a rough design in his notebook. It looked like a small drone with spinning blades on top, equipped with sensors and arms to handle tasks in the fields. He called it Agribot. Though the name sounded simple, Ethan felt proud of it. This was going to be his chance to prove himself, to show everyone that he wasn't just some poor farm boy who got bullied every day. But building Agribot wouldn't be easy. Ethan needed parts, motors, batteries, circuits, and other supplies, but buying them was out of the question. His family couldn't afford extras like that, so he decided to get creative. Over the next few weekends, Ethan visited local junkyards and recycling centers, searching for anything useful. He found broken electronics, discarded wires, and even an old lawnmower engine that he thought might work for his project. Each discovery gave him hope. Back in his attic, Ethan carefully dismantled the items he'd collected, salvaging whatever he could. He spent hours watching online tutorials, teaching himself how to solder wires and assemble circuits. Sometimes he stayed up late into the night, his eyes glued to the screen of his old laptop as he studied coding languages. Despite the long days of school and farm work, Ethan never felt tired when he was working on Agribot. It was his escape, his way of proving that he could do something extraordinary. His younger sister, Lily, noticed how much time Ethan was spending on his project. She often peeked into the attic to see what he was doing. One evening, she climbed the ladder and sat cross-legged on the floor, watching him tinker with a circuit board. "What are you making?" she asked curiously. "It's a robot," Ethan replied without looking up. "It's supposed to help with farming." Lily tilted her head. "Like a tractor?" "Sort of," Ethan said, smiling faintly. "But smarter. It can do things by itself." "That's cool," Lily said. "Can I help?" Ethan hesitated for a moment before nodding. Sure. You can draw pictures of what it should look like. Lily grinned and grabbed a piece of paper. As she started sketching, Ethan felt grateful to have someone who believed in him. Most people, including their parents, thought he was wasting his time. But Lily didn't judge him. She just wanted to help. At school, however, nothing had changed. Chad and his friends still mocked Ethan daily. One afternoon during lunch, Ethan overheard Chad bragging to his crew about his latest football victory. Megan rolled her eyes dramatically. Football is so boring, she said. Why don't we find something fun to do, like messing with Farmer Fred again? Ethan froze, pretending not to hear them. He was sitting alone under a tree eating a peanut butter sandwich. Moments later, Chad appeared in front of him, blocking the sunlight. Hey, Fred, Chad said loudly, drawing attention from nearby students. What's in your bag today? More junkyard treasures? Ethan ignored him and kept eating. He hated how Chad always managed to humiliate him in front of everyone. But instead of feeling angry, Ethan felt a strange sense of calm. He reminded himself why he was putting up with all this nonsense. Soon they'd see what he was capable of. Chad wasn't satisfied with Ethan's silence. Come on, man, he taunted. Show us what you've been hiding. Is it another one of those lame drawings? Before Ethan could respond, Ryan snatched his backpack off the ground and dumped its contents onto the grass. Notebook pages fluttered everywhere, along with pens, a calculator, and a small circuit board Ethan had been working on. The crowd laughed as Ethan scrambled to gather his belongings. Look at this, Ryan said, holding up the circuit board. What's this supposed to be? Some kind of toy? It's not a toy, Ethan snapped, snatching it back. For once, his voice carried a hint of defiance. Oh yeah? Chad smirked. Then what is it? Ethan hesitated. He didn't want to tell them about Agribot, not yet. Not until it was ready. Instead, he shrugged and said, You wouldn't understand. That seemed to amuse Chad even more. Whatever, Farmer Fred. Keep playing with your little gadgets. Maybe someday you'll actually make something useful. As Chad and his friends walked away, Ethan clenched his fists. Their words stung, but they also fueled his determination. He promised himself that when Agribot was finished, he'd show them exactly how wrong they were. Despite the bullying, Ethan continued making progress on his project. By now, he had built a basic frame for the drone using lightweight aluminum scraps. The motors he'd salvaged from the junkyard worked surprisingly well, and he'd managed to program the sensors to detect moisture levels in soil. Each small success brought him closer to his goal. One Saturday afternoon, Ethan decided to test Agribot outside. He carried it down to the field behind the barn where no one would see him. With trembling hands, he powered it on and watched as the propellers began to spin. Ethan stood in the middle of the field behind his family's barn, clutching Agribot tightly in his hands. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the rows of corn and wheat. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of nearby trees, and the air smelled faintly of earth and grass. For a moment, Ethan forgot about everything else, the bullying, the stress of school, the struggles at home, and focused only on the task ahead. He had been working on Agribot for weeks now, piecing it together from scraps and spare parts. It wasn't perfect. The frame was a little uneven and one of the propellers wobbled slightly when it spun. But Ethan believed in what he'd built. Tonight, he would finally test it outside to see if it could do what he hoped. Fly, analyze soil conditions, and perform basic farming tasks. Taking a deep breath, Ethan placed Agribot gently on the ground. He pressed the power button, and the machine whirred to life. The propellers began spinning slowly at first, then faster until they hummed steadily. Ethan stepped back, watching nervously as the drone lifted off the ground. It hovered a few feet, above the dirt, swaying slightly but staying airborne. Yes, Ethan whispered to himself, unable to contain his excitement. This was the farthest he'd gotten with testing. So far, so good. Next, he activated the sensors. Agribot lowered itself closer to the soil and extended a small arm equipped with a probe. The probe touched the ground, and a soft beep sounded as data appeared on Ethan's phone screen. Moisture levels, nutrient content, temperature, everything seemed accurate. Ethan grinned. His invention was actually working, but there was still more to test. Agribot's final function was planting seeds, which required precision and control. Ethan loaded a tiny compartment with dried corn kernels and programmed the drone to drop them into the soil at specific intervals. Then he sent it flying along, a straight row of freshly tilled earth. The drone moved smoothly, its mechanical arm lowering every few feet to deposit a seed into the ground. Ethan followed closely, inspecting each spot where it landed. To his amazement, the seeds were planted, evenly and at just the right depth. It wasn't flawless. There were moments when the drone drifted slightly off course, but overall, it performed better than Ethan had dared to hope. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the horizon orange and pink, Ethan powered down Agribot and sat cross-legged on the ground beside it. He felt a wave of pride wash over him. All those late nights tinkering in his attic, all the teasing he endured at school, it suddenly felt worth it. He was doing something meaningful, something that could change things not just for his family, but for farmers everywhere. When Ethan returned to the house later that evening, his parents were sitting at the kitchen table, discussing finances. His father looked up as Ethan walked in, noticing the dirt smudged on his son's face and clothes. "What have you been up to?" his father asked gruffly. "Just testing something," Ethan replied, setting Agribot carefully on the counter. "It's a project I've been working on." His mother raised an eyebrow. "Another one of your experiments?" "It's different this time," Ethan said quickly. "I think it might actually help us with the farm." His parents exchanged skeptical glances, but Ethan didn't let their doubt discourage him. Instead, he explained how Agribot worked, showing them videos he'd recorded during earlier tests. At first, they listened quietly, unsure what to make of it. But by the end, even his father looked impressed. "If it can really do what you say, it might save us a lot of time," his father admitted. "And maybe some money, too." Ethan nodded eagerly. "That's the plan." The next day at school, Ethan kept thinking about Agribot. He couldn't wait to finish building it and enter it into the science fair. Winning wasn't his main goal. He just wanted to prove to himself that he could create something amazing. Still, the idea of recognition lingered in the back of his mind. Maybe, just maybe, it would earn him a little respect from his classmates. During lunch, Ethan found himself sitting alone again as usual. He pulled out his notebook and started sketching improvements for Agribot, lost in thought. Suddenly, Chad and his friends approached, interrupting his concentration. "Well, well," Chad said, smirking. "Farmer Fred is drawing pictures again. What is that? Another one of your silly inventions?" Ethan closed his notebook without looking up. "It's none of your business," he muttered. "Oh, come on," Megan chimed in, leaning closer. "Show us, we're curious." "No," Ethan said firmly, tucking the notebook into his bag. He wasn't ready to share his project, not with anyone, especially not with Chad. Chad frowned, clearly annoyed by Ethan's refusal. "Fine, keep your secrets, but don't expect anyone to take you seriously." As they walked away, laughing, among themselves, Ethan felt a pang of frustration. They didn't understand. None of them did. But he reminded himself why he was doing this. It wasn't for their approval. It was for himself. That night, Ethan worked late into the evening, refining Agribot's design. He replaced the wobbly propeller with a sturdier one he'd salvaged from an old fan and rewired the motor connections to improve stability. By the time he finished, his eyelids were heavy with exhaustion, but he felt satisfied. Agribot was almost complete. Before heading to bed, Ethan glanced out the attic window at the starry sky. Somewhere out there, people were dreaming big dreams just like him, and someday, he hoped he'd be one of them, a person who made a difference. Little did Ethan know, his journey was far from over. The hardest part was still ahead, presenting Agribot to the world and proving that he wasn't just a poor farm boy. He was someone capable of greatness. The day of the science fair finally arrived, and Ethan woke up before sunrise. too excited to sleep any longer. He carefully packed Agribot into a worn-out cardboard box, cushioning it with old blankets to keep it safe during the trip to school. As he carried the box downstairs, his mother smiled at him from the kitchen. "Good luck today," she said softly. "We're proud of you." Ethan nodded, feeling a mix of nerves and determination. He knew this was his chance to show everyone what he was capable of, not just Chad and his friends, but teachers, classmates, and even himself. But deep down, he couldn't help wondering if anyone would truly appreciate his hard work. When he arrived at school, the gymnasium was already buzzing with activity. Students were setting up their projects, towering volcanoes spewing fake lava, solar-powered cars zipping across tables, and elaborate posters explaining complex scientific theories. Ethan found a quiet corner near the back of the room and began unpacking Agribot. His display wasn't flashy or colorful like some of the others, but he didn't care. He believed in his invention, and that was all that mattered. As Ethan arranged his materials, he noticed Chad and his crew walking into the gym. They glanced around, clearly uninterested in most of the projects. But when Chad spotted Ethan, his eyes lit up with mischief. He nudged Megan and Ryan, and the three of them sauntered over. "Well, well," Chad said loudly enough for nearby students to hear. "Looks like Farmer Fred decided to join the science fair after all." "What's this? Supposed to be a toy tractor?" Several heads turned toward Ethan's table, and a few people snickered. Ethan clenched his fists but forced himself to stay calm. "It's called Agribot," he replied firmly. "And it's not a toy." "Oh yeah?" Chad smirked, crossing his arms. "What does it do exactly?" Before Ethan could answer, one of the judges, a tall woman wearing glasses, approached the group. She introduced herself as Ms. Peterson and asked Ethan to explain his project. Trying to ignore Chad's smug expression, Ethan took a deep breath and began describing Agribot's purpose and functions. "It's a farming drone," he explained. "It can plant seeds, monitor soil conditions, and water crops automatically. It's designed to make farming easier and more efficient." Ms. Peterson looked intrigued. "That sounds impressive. Have you tested it yet?" "Yes," Ethan said, nodding. "I've done several tests and it works pretty well. I'd be happy to demonstrate." Chad rolled his eyes dramatically. "Sure. Go ahead. Let's see what your little gadget can do." Ethan ignored him and focused on setting up Agribot. He placed it on the floor in front of his table, powered it on, and watched as the propellers started spinning. Slowly, the drone lifted off the ground, hovering steadily a few feet above the floor. A murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd that had gathered around. Next, Ethan activated the sensors. Agribot lowered itself and extended its probe, simulating soil analysis. Data appeared on Ethan's phone screen, showing moisture levels and nutrient content. Then, he loaded the seed compartment and programmed the drone to perform a planting demonstration. It moved smoothly along an imaginary row, dropping tiny beads onto the gym floor to represent seeds. By the time Agribot returned to its starting position, the audience was silent. Even Chad looked stunned, his usual smirk replaced by wide-eyed disbelief. For a moment, no one spoke. Then applause broke out, growing louder as more people joined in. "That was incredible," Ms. Peterson exclaimed, jotting notes on her clipboard. "You've clearly put a lot of thought and effort into this. I'm very impressed." Ethan felt a rush of pride, but he kept his expression neutral. He thanked the judge quietly, then turned to pack up Agribot. Chad stepped forward hesitantly, looking unusually awkward. Good job, man," Chad mumbled, extending a hand. "I didn't think you'd actually pull it off." For a second, Ethan considered ignoring him, but instead he shook Chad's hand briefly, saying nothing. Revenge wasn't his goal. Proving himself was. And he had done that. Later that afternoon, Ethan sat alone in the school library, reflecting on the day's events. Winning first place wasn't guaranteed. He knew many of the other projects were excellent, but he didn't care about the outcome anymore. Just knowing that people had seen his hard work and believed in him was enough. As he flipped through his notebook, sketching ideas for improvements to Agribot, Lily came running up to him, her face glowing with excitement. You were amazing, she gushed. Everyone was talking about your project. Even Mrs. Thompson said she'd never seen anything like it. Ethan smiled faintly. Thanks, Lil. That means a lot. Lily plopped down beside him, swinging her legs back and forth. Do you think you'll win? I don't know, Ethan admitted. But it doesn't really matter. I proved something to myself today. That's what counts. Lily nodded seriously. You did, and I'm super proud of you. That evening, Ethan walked home carrying Agribot in its box. The sun was setting, casting golden light across the fields surrounding his family's farm. He paused for a moment, gazing at the horizon. For the first time in a long while, he felt hopeful, not just about the science fair results, but about his future. Building Agribot had taught him that he was capable of far more than he'd ever imagined. No matter how difficult life got, he now knew that hard work and determination could lead to greatness. And though challenges undoubtedly lay ahead, Ethan was ready to face them head-on. He entered the house to find his parents sitting at the kitchen table waiting for him. His father raised an eyebrow. So, he said gruffly. How did it go? Ethan set the box down and shrugged modestly. Pretty well. People liked it. His mother smiled warmly. We're proud of you, Ethan. You've worked so hard on this. Thanks, Ethan replied, feeling a lump rise in his throat. It's not over yet, though. There's still more I want to do. His father nodded approvingly. Then get to it. We'll support you every step of the way. As Ethan climbed the stairs to his attic room later that night, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Agribot was only the beginning. Someday he hoped to create inventions that would change the world, not just for farmers, but for everyone. And he knew deep down that he had the strength to make it happen. With a final glance at the stars twinkling outside his window, Ethan picked up his tools and got back to work. The journey was far from over, but he was ready for whatever came next. The following week was full of surprises for Ethan. After the science fair, word about Agribot spread quickly around the school. Teachers praised him during class, and even students who had once ignored or teased him started treating him differently. Some kids asked questions about how Agribot worked, while others simply nodded respectfully when they passed him in the hallway. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt like he belonged, not because he tried to fit in, but because people finally saw him for who he truly was. On Friday morning, an announcement came over the intercom calling all science fair participants to the auditorium. Ethan's heart raced as he made his way there, clutching his backpack tightly. He wasn't sure what to expect. Would Agribot win an award? Or would it be overlooked in favor of flashier projects? When he entered the auditorium, he saw rows of chairs filled with students and teachers. At the front of the room was a long table covered with trophies and certificates. Ms. Peterson, the judge from the science fair, stood at the podium, ready to announce the winners. We are incredibly proud of every student who participated in this year's science fair, she began, her voice echoing through the room. Each project demonstrated creativity, hard work, and innovation. However, 3 projects stood out above the rest. Ethan held his breath as Ms. Peterson announced the third-place winner. It wasn't him, but he clapped politely along with everyone else. Then came second place, another student who had built a solar-powered car. Still no mention of Ethan's name. Finally, Ms. Peterson reached the top prize. And the first-place winner is Ethan Carter for his groundbreaking invention, Agribot. The room erupted into applause. Ethan froze for a moment, unsure if he'd heard correctly, but then Lily, sitting a few rows away, leapt to her feet and cheered loudly, snapping him out of his daze. Slowly, Ethan stood up and walked to the stage, his legs feeling like jelly beneath him. As he accepted the trophy, Ethan glanced out at the audience. His parents were there, smiling proudly from the back row. Beside them sat Lily, beaming with excitement. Even Chad and his friends looked impressed, though they were clapping more out of obligation than enthusiasm. Ethan managed a small smile as he held the trophy aloft. Thank you, he said quietly into the microphone, his voice trembling slightly. I couldn't have done this without the support of my family and friends, and I hope Agribot can help farmers everywhere work smarter and more efficiently. When the ceremony ended, Ethan returned to his seat, still clutching the trophy. Several students approached him afterward to congratulate him, including some he barely knew. One girl named Emma even asked if she could interview him for the school newspaper. Ethan agreed, surprised by how much attention he was receiving. That afternoon, Ethan went home eager to share the news with his family. When he walked through the door, his mother rushed over and hugged him tightly. "You did it," she exclaimed, tears glistening in her eyes. "We're so proud of you, Ethan." His father shook his hand firmly, something he rarely did. "You've made us proud, son. Keep going, there's no telling what you'll accomplish next." Ethan grinned, feeling a warmth inside him that he hadn't felt in years. Winning the science fair wasn't just about the trophy. It was proof that he could overcome challenges and achieve greatness despite the odds stacked against him. Over the next few days, life at school continued to change for Ethan. Chad stopped teasing him altogether, and Megan and Ryan seemed to avoid him entirely. Instead, Ethan found himself surrounded by new friends, students who shared his interest in science and technology. They invited him to join their study groups and brainstorm ideas for future projects. For once, Ethan felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. But not everything changed overnight. Some students still whispered behind his back, jealous of his success. Others acted friendly only because they wanted to learn how he'd won first place. Ethan didn't let any of it bother him, though. He knew who he was, and he didn't need validation from anyone else. One evening, as Ethan worked on upgrading, Agribot in his attic, Lily climbed up to visit him. She had brought him a glass of lemonade and sat down to watch him tinker. "What are you working on now?" she asked curiously. "I'm adding a feature to Agribot," Ethan replied, adjusting. "A small camera mounted on the drone. It'll be able to detect pests and diseases in crops so farmers can deal with problems before they get worse." "That's cool," Lily said, sipping her lemonade. "Do you think you'll enter another competition?" "Maybe," Ethan said thoughtfully. "There's a regional science fair coming up. If I can improve Agribot enough, I might try entering it." Lily grinned. "You should totally do it. You'd crush it." Ethan chuckled, appreciating her confidence in him. "We'll see. There's still a lot of work to do." The weekend before the regional science fair, Ethan spent nearly every waking hour perfecting Agribot. He tested its new features in the fields behind the barn, making adjustments until everything ran smoothly. His parents pitched in wherever they could, whether it was helping carry tools or offering encouragement when things didn't go as planned. On the day of the regional fair, Ethan arrived at the convention center early, setting up his display alongside other talented students. The competition was fierce. There were robots that could solve puzzles, apps that tracked environmental data, and machines designed to clean oceans. But Ethan remained focused, reminding himself why he was there. When it was his turn to present, Ethan stepped forward confidently. He explained Agribot's purpose, demonstrated its capabilities, and answered judges' questions with ease. By the end of his presentation, the panel of judges looked thoroughly impressed. Later that evening, the winners were announced. Ethan didn't take first place this time. He earned second, but he was still thrilled. The $10,000 prize money would go a long way toward helping his family pay off debts and invest in their farm. More importantly, the experience reinforced his belief that he could achieve anything he set his mind to. As Ethan drove home with his family that night, he reflected on how far he'd come. Just months ago, he'd been a quiet, bullied farm boy with big dreams but little confidence. Now he was a young inventor whose hard work had earned him respect and recognition. Life wouldn't always be easy, but Ethan knew he had the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. With a contented sigh, he leaned back in his seat, letting the rhythm of the road lull him into a peaceful state. The journey wasn't over. It was only beginning. And Ethan was ready for whatever came next. Ethan's life changed in ways he never imagined after the regional science fair. Winning second place brought him more attention than he'd ever expected. Local newspapers wrote articles about his invention, calling Agribot a game changer for modern farming. Teachers at school began using his story as an example of perseverance and creativity. Even Chad and his friends stopped teasing him altogether, though Ethan didn't care much about that anymore. What mattered to him was the sense of purpose he now felt. The prize money from the competition made a huge difference for Ethan's family. They used it to fix their tractor, buy new seeds, and pay off some of their debts. For the first time in years, they weren't constantly worrying about how to make ends meet. Ethan's parents often told him how grateful they were, but he shrugged it off. Helping his family was just one of the reasons he'd worked so hard on Agribot. Despite the recognition, Ethan stayed humble. He knew there was still a lot to learn and improve. Every evening, after finishing his chores on the farm, he returned to his attic workshop to tinker with Agribot. He added new features, like a system to predict weather patterns and adjust irrigation accordingly. He also started designing smaller versions of the drone that could be used in home gardens or greenhouses. His dream was to create technology that anyone, big farms or small families, could use to grow food more efficiently. One day, while working on Agribot, Ethan received an email that surprised him. It was from a professor at a nearby university who had read about his invention in the newspaper. The professor invited Ethan to visit the campus and tour their robotics lab. At first, Ethan hesitated. He wasn't sure if he belonged in such a prestigious place, but Lily encouraged him to go. "You have to do it," she said excitedly. "It's a once-in-a-lifetime chance." Ethan agreed and spent the next weekend visiting the university. The robotics lab was incredible, filled with advanced machines and brilliant minds. The professor showed Ethan around, explaining how researchers were working on similar projects to help industries like agriculture. By the end of the tour, the professor offered Ethan a summer internship in the lab. "I see great potential in you," the professor said kindly. "You're already ahead of most students your age. With guidance, you could achieve amazing things." Ethan couldn't believe it. An internship at the university would give him access to resources and knowledge he could only dream of. He accepted the offer without hesitation, knowing it was another step toward achieving his goals. As the weeks passed, Ethan balanced his high school studies with preparations for the internship. He continued upgrading Agribot, and even started teaching himself about artificial intelligence, hoping to make the drone smarter and more autonomous. His teachers noticed his dedication and began encouraging him to apply for scholarships to engineering programs after graduation. At school, Ethan's newfound confidence inspired others. Several classmates approached him, asking for advice on their own science projects. One boy named Jake, who loved tinkering with electronics, became Ethan's unofficial assistant. Together, they brainstormed ideas and shared tips on coding and design. Ethan enjoyed mentoring Jake, remembering how lonely he'd felt when he first started working on Agribot. Even Chad reached out to Ethan one afternoon, though it was clear he wasn't used to apologizing. "Hey, I wanted to say sorry," Chad muttered awkwardly. "For all the stuff I said before, you're really talented, man." Ethan nodded, accepting the apology graciously. "Thanks, and don't worry about it. We all make mistakes." Chad looked relieved and stuck out his hand. This time Ethan shook it without hesitation. Letting go of past grudges felt freeing. He realized that forgiveness wasn't just about others, it was about moving forward with a lighter heart. By the time summer arrived, Ethan was ready for his internship. On his first day at the university, he walked into the robotics lab feeling both nervous and excited. The equipment was state-of-the-art, and the other interns were older college students. But instead of feeling intimidated, Ethan reminded himself why he was there: to learn and grow. Over the course of the summer, Ethan thrived in the lab. He collaborated with researchers on cutting-edge projects, gaining hands-on experience with tools and techniques he'd only read about before. He also met mentors who believed in his potential and pushed him to aim higher. By the end of the internship, he had developed a prototype for a new version of Agribot, one that could operate entirely on renewable energy. When Ethan returned home, he shared his experiences with his family. They listened eagerly as he described everything he'd learned and the connections he'd made. His father patted him on the back proudly. "You've come a long way, son. Keep chasing those dreams." Ethan smiled, knowing his journey was far from over. He planned to enter more competitions apply for scholarships, and eventually attend college to study engineering. His ultimate goal was to revolutionize farming worldwide, making it easier and more sustainable for generations to come. On quiet evenings, Ethan liked to sit outside in the fields behind the barn watching the sunset. Sometimes he brought Agribot with him, imagining all the possibilities for its future. The drone represented more than just an invention. It symbolized hope, resilience, and the power of believing in oneself. As the sky turned shades of orange and pink, Ethan thought about how much his life had changed since those days of being bullied at school. Back then, he'd felt invisible, like no one cared about what he had to offer. Now, he knew better. He had proven to himself, and to the world, that he was capable of greatness. With a deep breath, Ethan stood up and stretched. There was still work to do, dreams to chase, and challenges to overcome. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid of any of it. He was ready to face whatever came next, armed with determination, creativity, and the unwavering belief that anything was possible. And so, as the stars began to twinkle above the fields, Ethan picked up Agribot and headed back toward the house. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities, and he intended to seize every single one.